Well, hello there, I'm Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet, and today is a very different video on a Wednesday. This is a series called Warhammer Wednesday. I called it that because I got back into Warhammer last year, but it's not just about Warhammer, okay? We did talk in the third-party video about how it isn't just Games Workshop, they make models. I talked about Raging Heroes and about Creature Caster as well. There'll be a link in the cards to that video for you to look at about kit bashing and third-party stuff. Today is a crossover of Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, and model painting in general. Today I'm going to talk about the Wizkids Rakdos model, this thing here, the unpainted one that I have then gone and painted. I'm going to do a kind of... It's not a tutorial, I don't want to call this a tutorial because A, I don't think I'm a good enough painter to really teach everyone lots of tricks. It's more of a painting vlog, a bit of a review as I compare this Rakdos to other products on the market that are similar, like the Bloodthirster from GW. So it's a review, it's a vlog, it's a little bit of a tutorial, it's a bit of a mishmash sort of thing going on. So if you enjoy this, hit the like button down below and leave a comment. If you have any questions about what I've done in this video, let me know as well. If you like this sort of stuff, I'd be more than willing to do this again in future, because this is a combination of all my hobbies, right? So sit back, relax, as I talk you through who the fuck Rakdos is, what this product is, and then talk through my process to get it from unpainted white plastic with a bit of a tacky finish to what I think looks like quite a good model. This is the Rakdos Lord of Riots. This is a model from Wizkids utilising the Magic the Gathering license. There are others in this range too. There's a Core Hookmaster, there is a Jace, there are some other Guildmasters too, like Aurelia, and I might paint some more up on the channel in the future if this is a popular video. This particular model is part of Wave 13 of what they're calling their unpainted model range. It's a selection of like re-releases as well as simultaneous releases of models that have already come before painted but are now unpainted. I was drawn to this obviously when I saw it at my game store because, well, I fucking love Magic and I'm super into model painting at the moment as well. The idea that I could paint this myself is a big draw. I'll be honest, the biggest downside of Wizkids products in the past, when I picked them up to use for D&D, is that they are quite soft and malleable in terms of the plastic, and the quality of painting is just not very good. But don't forget, these are mass-produced and not done to a quality that I would like, but they are mass-produced in a factory. This is Rakdos. He is the demon, like, leader of the Rakdos cult on Ravnica. He is a big, angry demon man, and he leads a load of, like, murder fuck clowns. So, yeah, he's an interesting character in that respect. This is Lord of Riots, which is based, I guess, more of his second iteration. All of the arts are great. I've never been a huge fan of Rakdos himself as a card, but his second and third iterations are both fun and interesting in terms of what you can do with them in the game of Magic. I was wondering whether this model was actually alongside a D&D supplemental like data sheet, character sheet for him as a creature. I have the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica somewhere. I moved home like 3 or 4 months ago. I still have boxes not unpacked underneath this desk here, and it's in one of those. So I didn't look, and I forgot, and now I'm recording. Let me know in the comments below. This model was 14 English pounds, which is incredibly cheap compared to comparably sized products from some other premium model companies. I'll talk more about that in a moment. It is pre-primed with a very tacky to the touch feeling white primer. It's a 2 or technically 3-part kit with the need to fasten the end of his scythe to the body, and there's obviously a base as well. Some reason the packaging like crushes in his back wing to his body, which made it very... I don't know, it looks like it's going to be difficult to paint. So I got the hairdryer out. I don't actually know what material this model is made from. It's evidently some form of plastic, but I am unsure exactly what. Whether it's the same kind of plastic found in GW kits? Well, probably not, because it's a bit different as I'll talk about in a moment. Or maybe some form of resin. It is a soft, bendy plastic that doesn't warp upon being stressed like you would get with the harder GW plastics. Probably means that it doesn't have as much detail, but in this case where it's a cheap, alternative, it's not so bad. It's less bendy and springs back to its original shape more so than the pre-painted Wizkid stuff I've had before, where if you bend it, it just sort of bends to where it was, and yeah, but it's still soft and easy to bend. I actually have some of those models somewhere, but I couldn't find those either, because I have still not unpacked everything. because I'm lazy. I heated up the wings and pulled them back, and I wasn't looking for a complete change of their posing, otherwise I would have perhaps tied them back and left them overnight after heating them up, but instead I just wanted to allow the model to breathe a little bit in its posing, perhaps look less claustrophobic, and make it easier to paint as well. Next step was to clean up mold lines and slips. Sometimes when the model is molded or injection cast or whatever process is done to make the thing, you get these little lines where there was seepage out of the mold. You can easily just scrape these off with a sharp blade, or in some places file them off like so. This model's actually rather clean, surprisingly so, honestly. I only looked to clean up obvious places like the shoulder pads and the tops of the wings, places that would catch paint when I dry brush and stand out like a sore thumb. Speaking of thumbs, don't do what I was doing and scrape towards myself. You should always be scraping away, because one slip could have an X-Acto blade to the thumb like I did last summer, and it was not great. It actually makes me wince thinking about it. I was trying to detach some eBay bought Sisters of Silence from their bases to put new resin bases on them, and I was like this, and it slipped and it went straight into my thumb, and it was... whew. I use super glue to glue the parts. Plastic glue doesn't always work with every type of plastic. For example, resin that you get from Forge World with GW is impervious to it because plastic glue actually melts the plastic to form a chemical bond or a chemical seal. Super glue is more brittle for that reason, as it's not a chemical seal, it's just a layer of super glue that's gone hard, and it's more likely to break than plastic glue, but as I couldn't figure out what kind of plastic it was, this felt the safest bet. The fact that the plastic is so soft and easy to like bend and maneuver and it goes back to its original shape makes me think that I probably wouldn't break the seals of the super glue if I dropped this. I'm thinking it would probably actually sort of cushion its own blow upon being dropped. His scythe shaft was a little bent, but looking at Rakdos art assets, it soon revealed to me that it's kind of meant to be. It's a little warped and imperfect because he's like an ancient demon. Before we get to priming this bad boy, let's do a little size comparison. On the right is a Nurgle-themed demon prince built from the official GW kit, the plastic kit. On the right, that is the right. On the left, there's an official GW sculpt of the Bloodthirster. Rakdos is actually really big, much bigger than I first thought when I saw it in the shop. Or maybe Bloodthirster is smaller than I thought. I thought he would be considerably smaller. I was planning to have him as a model on my shelf, something to do as a bit of a project, but also to play him in D&D as a generic demon, or play him as a demon prince on the tabletop in Warhammer 40k as a proxy or counts as model, as I talked about in the third party video. However, he is significantly bigger, like much bigger than a demon prince, and only marginally smaller than a thirster. I do think if your opponents and your friends were okay with it, you could play him as a proxy thirster because he is kind of the same size. Keep in mind, obviously, his silhouette will be different. He doesn't have the same like wingspan and stuff, but besides that, I think he makes a very good Bloodthirster. Keep in mind that this Thirster model at RRP is £80, making it almost 5 times dearer than the Rakdos model. If you hate building shit like I do, the fact that Rakdos comes pre-built is also a benefit if you're looking for a quick model just to pick up, clean up, and paint. Now, it's really obvious that Wizkids models are just not as intricately designed and not as detailed as Games Workshop stuff. If I'm honest, Games Workshop are one of the best model companies in the world, and it fucking shows, right? When you look at their sculpts and the new stuff they're putting out for Age of Sigmar, but you've got to bear in mind and keep price in mind for this. This Wizkid model was £14. The Bloodthirster cost me £77. That is roughly, I'm shit at maths, but I'm going to... It's over 4 times. It's close to 5, right? Fuck, it's over 5 times. When I divide 77 by 5, it's 15.4. That's what calculators are for. Fuck. It's hard to ignore that the value and the bang for buck with this model is wild. Right, on with painting. I primed him black. I used a Halford's matte finish spray paint cam because it's cheaper than GW and does the job just as good. I got this tip from Midwinter Minis. What a fucking lad. Like I said, I primed him black, which already makes him look far less dorky and far more badass. That aside though, the reason for the prime is because I want the overall colour scheme to be quite dark, so working up from black is better. For example, if you miss a spot or don't quite get into the nooks and the crannies, and then you light him up for a photo later, the black won't show up as badly, where the white will stand out like a sore thumb. In addition to this, black will darken the tone of the more transparent paints that you add as you go too. And the primer it already had on it in the box, because it's pre-primed, had a bit of a satin finish to it, a little bit gammy to the touch, so I was apprehensive about painting directly onto it in case it didn't apply very well. There's nothing wrong with priming your models white initially. That was always the go-to when I was a kid, but that's better for lighter colour schemes. I just looked over here, 1 second. As you can see, I've primed my Sisters of Battle stuff in white because, well, it's going to be a light colour scheme, so might as well start from a light colour. When I paint using what's called a wet palette. Built from a Marmite sandwich lunchbox container, some of the moist kitchen towel inside. You basically layer a kitchen towel and make it wet and then pour most of the excess water. Then you put baking paper over the top of it and voila, you've got a cheaply made wet palette. I really should invest in a proper one at this point, but this is what I've been using for like a year now. This allows your paints to stay wet throughout the project for hours at a time. Even when you close it up and leave it overnight, some of your paints will still be usable the next day, as opposed to drying out on a non-wet palette. I haven't painted for over a week here, and the paints from my last session were still almost usable. A little water might actually reactivate them, although I wasn't willing to try because the paints weren't relevant to this model. And yes, I know not changing this over for over a week and leaving it in my office wet breeds germs, but I don't care. I'm a Superman. I don't give a fuck. Citadel branded water pot here as well because I am a simp. And when you get into Warhammer, it gives your family an easy way to pick up weird shit for you for Christmas, even overpriced water pots. Okay, so for this project, I've been using a fucking shit ton of paints. I will list them in the description below and go through them as I go, so don't worry about catching it all here. Our first task is to block out the large areas of colour within their base colours with skin. We start with Wazdakka Red from Citadel. For this, I'm using a cheap but large brush got from Amazon in one of the cheapest, shittiest brush bundles you can buy for basically less glamorous jobs like this. Paint onto palette, add some water to thin it down, and my intention is to channel my inner Duncan Rhodes here with 2 thin coats. Do not worry if your first coat of paint looks too thin over the black. The subsequent touch-ups and coats will sort that shit right out. I then went on to block out all the other colours on the model. Now, I'm going to be using shades and washes to pull the model together, make it cohesive, and then I'm going to be dry brushing the skin. I don't care too much about being neat here yet with my blocking out of colours, as I can touch it all up later, and I will be guaranteed to be getting red everywhere as I dry brush the skin. I did all of the cloth with an underlayer of Steel Legion Drab, and fun fact, I felt like the model just wasn't, it didn't have enough contrast, enough different parts. So later on, I'm actually going to bring up the colour in this cloth to a lighter colour to add that contrast, that much needed contrast. Next up, we paint all the skulls, bones and horns with Skeleton Horde from Army Painter. This is so bright, we will be bringing this down later down the line with other paints. Now is the first time that I pick out an actual good brush. This is a 3 from Rosemary & Co, which are my main workhorse brushes, recommended by that Mr. Shy. Thank you, Stu. I'm using this here to get all the details and, all the nooks and crannies and the bits I might have missed previously. Right, time for some liquid magic. We're going to knock back a load of these colours with some Nuln Oil, a shade from Citadel. This will seep into the cracks and the recesses and give us some nice depth to the shadows. Keep in mind that this stuff can dry quite smeared, a little glossy, or even with tide marks on raised areas, but we'll fix that through layering and dry brushing later down the line. A little bit of simple paint wizardry will fix that easily. Here's a top tip. Be careful if you're new to painting not to knock this pot over, okay? If you are getting into painting, your shades and your washes are the most liquid-like paints you will own, other than perhaps inks. They are literally water-like in consistency, where other paints are much more viscous. One knocking it over, and you will waste the majority of the pot. It'll be all over your desk. I ruined at least 2 different, I say ruined, they're there to look nice but also take this sort of blow, right? But 2 beautiful playmats from my sponsor Ultra Pro doing this in the last year. It adds character to your workspace for sure, but perhaps put them in a little holder. Some people have little holders that they use. I probably should get one. I use a chunky, cheap brush to get in on the wings, and again I'm focused on getting into every little wrinkle with my shade. Ooh. And here is the finished shade. After it dries, look at the fucking magic it has performed on the details of his muscles. This is so easy. People think that painting is really difficult. It isn't when you know a few techniques and a few tools that are basically magic in a pot. They're cheating. Look at that hand and the shadows there. It's liquid skill at work. His wings took longer to dry as I applied much more there, so there's a thicker layer, therefore longer to dry. Here we see gravity pulling it at the bottom and creating like tide mark pots. I'm just going to use like a wet brush here to brush that away and sort that out, and dry brushing will fix the coffee stain look later. Now onto one of my favourite paints in all of the Citadel range. Some like to spend all day emulating metal with techniques like fucking, non-metallic metal stuff. I'm not. I just love me a shiny metallic paint. This is Leadbelcher. We paint up every piece of metal on his body with Leadbelcher here. It will be bright at first and we'll knock it back with some shades later. His chains are fiddly. Don't worry about the full coverage yet. Just gently drag your wet brush along the top to kind of highlight each chain, to give you a line to work with. Due to the dry brushing later, we won't focus on these chains because some of them will get lost in that red. The spikes are quite annoying, so if you're looking to paint this model in particular, I'd be careful to make sure you get every side of each of the spikes. Shiny Metal's done. I actually forgot about his ankle bracelets, which I will just randomly fill in at some point down the line. I don't know where I actually did it, but I definitely forgot about it at this stage. We did the metallics at this stage to let the Nuln Oil dry on his skin. It takes about half an hour, and the metallics did take quite a bit of time. Now on to another super fun step that I love. Dry brushing. Now, you can use expensive dry brushes made from the finest arse hairs of Scandinavian nuns, or like me, you can buy a cheap makeup brush with a firm end, from a cheap, I don't know, pound shop or Savers or whatever. I think this was actually from one of the discount store Savers here in the UK, and then just go to town on the model. Here we're using Astorath Red to brighten up all the raised surfaces to a brighter red, to emulate light hitting it and the skin being stretched thinner. We take the paint onto our brush and then dab the majority of it off onto some paper towel. Once you have very little left, we just brush purposefully in one direction. Just a brush motion on my leg then, sorry about the noise. Fuck, I'll try again. And once you have very little left, we brush purposefully in one direction to leave pigment on the raised areas. I'm mainly brushing down here to maintain a darker tone beneath to emulate shadows, but I'm also doing a bit of sideways brushing to try and hit those sort of like bone-like struts in the wings. This method will really bring out those bulging veins in Rakdos' wings too, which is nice if you're into that sort of thing. Dry brushing feels like cheating. It's the easiest way to add highlights to a model, and then over a washed mid-tone it can look amazing for very little work on any organic or natural looking material which has enough raised areas to catch the pigment, of course. It's not great on non-naturally occurring things, so like outside of rocks and flesh or monsters. If you're doing like armor, it can cause like a dusty, scratchy look that sounds good but doesn't look that good. But here it is perfect. Some people do look down their nose at dry brushing. Those people are elitist assholes. Fuck them. Next up, we start to really push into the brighter area of our mid-tone with an orange highlight. Again, we could be going in and doing edge highlighting, which I didn't do a lot of on this model, but instead we get some riser, rust, and it's the same process over again, hitting the top corners and upper edges of the model, but a little bit more sparingly than with the red layer beneath. I'm even using the same brush with most of it just wiped off to add a little bit of red to the tone, so the orange will mix in with it a little bit. But the orange will really bring out a brighter warmth in the skin and make it feel alive, and well, it will give us some contrast on the skin that will focus the eye as well. For example, here I am focusing on the hands, the face, and that front arm that the light would be hitting, but also the place where people will look. We've got bulging muscle, his angry face, and his clenched fists, all of which are a great like sort of focal point for the model. With that in mind, just don't worry about making the back half of his calf perfect. Like, dry brush it anyway, but no one is going to be looking down there unless you've got a calf fetish or you're looking to heavily scrutinize someone's model to be a dick. Loincloth was too dark for me, so I layered some Rakarth flesh, I think it is, over top of it to bring it up a notch and add some different visual texture to the model via contrast again. I don't want him to be one big red and orange blob. Once the dry brushing is done, I went in and touched up all the bone and metal that might have been hit by the red dry brushing, fixing all collateral damage and making sure my thin coats were shored up as well with a second or third coat. Next was another shade to bring some areas together. All metallics and the loincloth were dirtied up with Angrak's Earth shade. This is much like Nuln Oil, but where Nuln Oil is base black in colouring, this is more earthly with a brown tone. Not usually used on metals by most painting tutorials that I've seen. I just wanted to give the metal a really dirty, like grimy look. The next cheat in my book of cheats is relying on some contrast paints. Now, this didn't actually go as well as I wanted to, so I would perhaps take this bit with a pinch of salt. I used Skeleton Horde contrast over the bone in the horns from Army Painter to make a weathered skeleton colour, and it works usually on small skeletons and skulls. But it isn't great on large areas, and I wasn't super happy with the result of this here, and it also felt like I didn't evoke the dark, burning horns of most of Rakdos' arts either, so we will go back to this in a moment and fix it as we go. More dry brushing next. I grab another dirt cheap brush and some Dawnstone from Citadel to dry brush over the head of the staff and the rock below, both painted in Vallejo model colour dark grey that I didn't get footage of. Dawnstone isn't a dry paint by design, so it's not designed for dry brushing. Obvious statement really, but when you dry brush with it, just make sure that you extract more of the paint via the dabbing on a paper towel, because there's medium in there. The liquid part of paint, there's more medium in there as with most dry paints. Just be extra vigilant. Again, the dry brushing here brings out the details of the like raised areas and leaves recesses darkened to give it a natural rock look. Fuck, I love dry brushing. Next up, let's make some magma. Now, this is an experiment thing I've never done before. I've seen some tutorials before as well, and just never got around to actually doing it. So we use Vallejo model color ice yellow here. You could use a white to line all the molten cracks and make them light. Then we went in there with a watered down Mephiston Red with a hint of Troll Slayer orange mixed in on the palette to go over that yellow. This isn't just a waste of a step, by the way. The reason the yellow is there is to allow us to apply a relatively transparent paint and get good coverage. The red-orange mix would have been perhaps 2 or 3 coats to get to the same coverage over grey. Once that is done, I went in with Averland Sunset to paint the core of the magma, brighter, hotter parts of the magma. After this, I went to try and wash the scythe to give it a hue of warmth, like a glow as if it's on fire or it's hot. And I started with Caribou Crimson, which is like a dark red, and it looked bad. So I dabbed that off my thumb very quickly because it's like a wet paint, a wet wash that you can get off. And I went back to well, not back to, I went and grabbed a Vallejo model wash, this orange rust one. This stuff is so runny and not like having an easy way to get into the bottle that I had to squirt it into my special wash flour. Ooh woo. We let that dry and hit the base with some Mornfang brown, just hitting all the areas that aren't the rocks. Time to fix these horns. I take some dark grey on a palette and dry brush it over the ends to give them a slightly burnt, dirty look. I add some minor Troll Slayer orange highlights to the fingers and face and forward arms while I wait things to dry. We then darken the underneath of the horns with another natural feeling contrast paint in snakebite leather. This cheats to make the horns look organic as opposed to, solidly painted. I then decided to bring the horns into the same tone or mother colour, if you will, as the rest of the model. I hit the blade and the horns with a dry brush of Ryuza orange to warm them up, and then a softer, subtler dry brush of Kindle Flame to add this orange, almost light pink accent that knocks back a rather ghastly looking contrast job that almost ruined the entire model. Given half the chance, I think I would have done the horns completely differently, probably painted them in a similar fashion to what I did the loincloth, just in different colours. I go in with half and half mix of Steel Legion Drab and Skeleton Bone to highlight the top areas of the fabric, and I get really into it, adding varying amounts to the lighter tone, the darker tone as I go, and painting raised and lowered areas of the fabric. The result is some quite awesome looking fabric, if I do say so myself, and it was something that I didn't even realise I was doing. I was just like in the zone, listening to music, just going at it, until I watched the video back. I was like, wow, I didn't realise I was mixing paints so much on my palette to get different shades of colour. This is a real level up moment for me, and I'm really proud of it. It's something that I haven't done previously, and I kind of wish I'd done with the horns, albeit with different colours. I add some ice yellow to the centre of the magma, and whilst the blade isn't perfect, I think, for a very first attempt at magma cracked rock, it looks pretty good, especially at distance. I try to glaze a light highlight over the horns as I am still not happy, and line them with some Angrax Earthshade to darken the shadow areas. I finally lay a Skeleton Bone and orange mix over the horns, and well, they end up looking alright. Lastly, we put some Stormhost Silver to highlight all the raised ridges and some of the metal armour and chains, focusing on where the light would catch, ignoring bits under the arm, for example, because they don't need to shine. I dot the eyes with Averland Sunset and wash the face and horns with some Seraphim Sepia to bring it all together. And then, the final magic step, some Argrellan Earth, a texture paint that crackles as it dries. Some of the GW paint range is genuinely really impressive. I wish I had this as a kid. And here we go, this is a off-the-cuff time-lapse of Argrellan Earth drying, which is super satisfying to watch back. Lastly, I go in and dry brush some various stages of brown to tie the rock and the dirt together. I start with Steel Legion Drab, then go on to Gold Fag Brown, and lastly some Army Painter Skeleton to bring up a light highlight. But you could use a Shabty Bone there or any other light sort of bone-style colour. And that, my friends, is Rakdos. I am super happy with how he came out. The horns are perfect, but I think I salvaged them as I painted. But besides that, I think he looks good and true to his original art. I'm genuinely impressed with the quality of the sculpt, considering just how cheap these models are compared to the GW ones. Like I said, this dude is 1/5 of the price of a Bloodthirster, which is kind of wild considering the size that you saw at the beginning. This guy is going to look good on a tabletop as a big villain for a D&D party to fight. And like I said, he's a pretty good Bloodthirster proxy, or maybe just a large Demon Prince proxy. Yeah, I cannot fault the value for money of this model. I really cannot. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'll flash up some more pictures of him here. What do you think of the paint job? Is it good? Is it bad? I'm also open to feedback and discussion as well to improve as both a painter and a content creator. Did you enjoy this style of Warhammer Wednesday, and would you like to see more in future? Do you want to see more Wizkids models, third-party models, or would you like to see me do this with some GW stuff? Let me know in the comment section below. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet, and I'll see you all soon. Ta-ta for now.